Hello, everyone, and I'd like to introduce Danielle Downey today. She is the Rapid Transformation Coach and a lovely lady, and she's got a quite difficult story to tell in actual fact, but I think it's an important one that we really get out there. I'm a true believer of not having these secrets, and you've written a book as well, haven't you, Danielle? It's called It's No Secret. But before we go any further and I spill all the beans, I'm going to hand over to you, Danielle, so you can really tell the listeners more about you and what you're doing.
Okay, so like Wendy said, my name's Danny, and I live in Devon, along with 6 kids and a dog and crazy creatures, and I've got a background as a midwife. So I worked in the NHS for a long time before shifting careers. I think so many of us get stuck believing that we can't move career, and I had a late life career as working as a domestic abuse advocate. So I trained with Women's Aid to be an independent domestic abuse advocate, and I worked with very high risk victims of domestic abuse, helping them to stay safe because not everybody is ready to leave a relationship, and helping them through the court left somebody with their life after rebuilding it. I got into this sort of caring profession because I was a childhood victim of sexual violence from a member of my family, but I kept that hidden for many, many, many years, as so many survivors do. And I believe that the average age to disclose actually is about 48. That people tend to sit on it for a long, long, long time before telling others. So I see it now as my mission to help other people to realise that they're not alone. When 1 in 5 of us have perhaps been subject to not to domestic abuse, but to sexual violence as a child, I know that there's many of us out there. So I see my role now as about making other people realise that we're certainly not alone.
Yes, and I think that is very important because, as you say, children sit on it. They have no power, do they? They really, they're reliant on their caregivers, whoever it is, for their whole survival. And so therefore they've had all kinds of threats made to them, or they feel that they can't share it. So I think they're kind of, the shame and guilt that goes around that as well is horrendous, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
To be able to let's talk about it, and there seems to be waves of it. You know, when the Jimmy Savile thing all erupted, it became a huge kind of publicity, and we talk about it, and then it goes and it seems to go underground for a while, and I think it's just, and then it erupts again. You know, with Harvey Steinberg is his name. I can't remember.
Harvey Weinstein.
Weinstein.
And Jeffrey Epstein. They're both quite
Jeffrey Epstein. Yes. So we've had kind of, suddenly hits the headlines and everybody's talking about it, and then it goes underground again. And I think I don't know how you feel, but for me, people, they don't want to talk about it. It seems it's an unpleasant thing to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But why? You know, I don't get it. Why? And I'm sure you've come across it. Adults don't want to admit it, that this happened. You know, it's going on in their families. It seems to be real shame attached to it. So tell us, tell us more about your experience of that.
So just going back to your question, when you say, I wonder why people don't speak about it, I think for me, as somebody now who advocates for other people and somebody who stands up and says, actually, this happens to me and I have no shame or guilt around it, people don't want to rock the boat. I think so many of us bury memories. When we look at how the childhood brain works and develops, we often have a Pandora's box deep inside that we choose, or not perhaps subconsciously choose, to not uncover, because we realise that the ramifications are massive in disclosing. And I think we realise that as survivors, as children, very, very quickly, that I reached out once and nobody listened, therefore I never told anybody again, and closed the door on that rapidly. So I think there's lots of reasons why we perhaps as a culture don't talk about it. I think it's very painful for people. I think when we realise the statistics, 1 in 5 at least children are sexually abused before they're 18, but there are so many of us out there, but again, we feel guilt, we feel shame. Like you say, we may all be put at risk by very ages 40, 47, 48 for disclosure. And then I think that every time I sort of try and broach the subject with people, what should be an open and honest conversation, people sometimes just want to cover their hands, their ears over their hands, and just say, I'm not listening. It's too big. It's a little bit like domestic abuse, which again, another taboo subject that we have to open doors for people to come forward to alleviate themselves of guilt and shame, and also to stay safe.
Yes, and I think there is something very much about that guilt and shame, isn't there? And I think rocking the boat is definitely one of them. One
Absolutely.
of the things that really bothered me a lot was I'm quite willing to share that and talk about it, that I was in a relationship where it was very toxic, but the problem was that my husband had been abused as a child, and it really had such a dramatic effect on our relationship, and to the point that it was so toxic we had to end it. I could, because of the effects of it on him. It was really, it wasn't a good relationship. However much I tried to understand, I didn't have that understanding, and I was too close to him really to be able to kind of deal with it. But going through our divorce, one of the things that he was so adamant about, and I got a letter through my solicitor saying, please can you make an undertaking that you won't ever contact my mother and tell her. And his mother would have been, quite elderly at that point, but she was part of it. And yet he still wanted to protect her. I mean, she hadn't abused him in that
so
way,
common.
But it is, isn't it?
It is so
That
common.
Really, yes, protecting his mother, and yet no, she hadn't actually physically, sexually abused him, but she'd been. She hadn't believed him, and she was physically abusive to him. So it was, what is this? You've got to protect.
I think it's so hard to blame, as somebody who is very estranged from my family because of what's gone on. It's such a huge thing to feel like you're cast adrift in an ocean without anybody around you. So I'm very fortunate. I've got 6 children and a fantastic husband, and my family and my friends and the people that I love dearly. But I think it's a really big step to say, I call you out because of what happened. And it takes guts, and it's not for everybody. Therefore, some people would rather, they probably do love their parents, but they don't like what happened. And it's especially for me, it was once I became a parent myself, I started to then realise the issues that had gone on, but buried the actual sort of abuse for many, many, many years after that.
So you say you buried it for a long time.
Absolutely, but until I was about 38 when I started to get flashbacks. So I'd moved from midwifery into domestic abuse, was driving a lot, and just started to get a little video in my head that I could not shift, and I knew it was my truth. I knew exactly that what I was thinking, I was imagining, and initially thought I was going mad, was something that actually happened. And I know there's a lot more in there, but I don't, as somebody now who works with clients, I don't ever feel the need that we need to be traumatized ourselves and go back over the exact what, whys and wherefores.
No. I'm so in agreement with you, because I think that is the biggest fear, that people are worried about talking to a therapist or a professional, because they think they're going to have it all dragged up again, and that is the worst thing that can happen to anybody. And unless they want to. I mean, there are some that just want to be offloaded, and that's fine. But I've had no. I don't want to talk. No, we're not going to talk about the details. We're not going to talk about the details. We talk around it, and what the effect it had on you, and who was there to support you, and who wasn't.
Absolutely. And I think now it's about, for me as a survivor and also an advocate and a campaigner, it's about me saying to people, I've given up looking for perfection. We're all wholly imperfect, but I'll take whole for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm whole. I feel like I am on purpose, and that my past isn't who I am, but sometimes it's how I am. That there are certain things that are going to trigger me. There are certain ways that I might react to something because of what's gone on. So I can't always cognitively change. I was always looking for better. And I mean, it's an acceptance now that, it's not who I am, it's how I am sometimes. And I'm okay with that. And, there's no guilt, there's no shame. And, as I say in my coaching groups, we move. We move, and I'm not looking to move on from it, but we do move. We're in a perpetual sort of flow state of growing.
Yes. And I think that's another phrase that you move on. You can't ever obliterate the past.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the thing as well. Move on, come on, get over it. Why is it still bothering
pull yourself
you?
together.
Oh. But you can't, and I think that's another thing, because that just creates more guilt, doesn't it? More guilt.
Of course it does, yeah. And it also stops you feeling. I had 2 days last week when I felt such a huge sense of loss. It was like a blanket, and I cried solidly for about 24 hours. And I even took myself up into my car just to do some screaming, because it was like a physical pain. And I'm okay with that. I'm not mad. It was just another stage of my healing that I just had to acknowledge. And the last week I feel great. And I think it's when we start to try and dampen down that with guilt and shame and say, I should be over this now, that it's a cycle. It just sometimes things rear their head for no reason at all. And when we try and bury it, that's when we end up in huge, huge trouble.
Absolutely. And I think it's no different than, say, if you broke a bone and you've got that wound there.
Absolutely.
And all right, the bone will have knitted together, but there will be on occasions. I mean, I broke my ankle years and years ago, and generally it's fine, but there, I don't think about it, but there will be the odd occasion when I'll get that little twinge just in that area, and it comes back, and you think, that's just a reminder that there's a wound there.
Yeah, do you know what? That's a fantastic analogy. That's exactly how it is. I broke my wrist as a child, and in the autumn, I tend to get a little bit stiff. And that's a beautiful analogy. That makes me feel exactly that. Most of the time, it's fine, and then occasionally I just get a bit of a dull ache, and just kind of have to accept it, and that's okay. And on we go.
Yeah. And the other analogy I use, I mean, it is a fact, isn't it? Our memories are stored, and I see them as in a photo book. This isn't my original thought, but it is. We store memories. The brain says, right, this is important. And it says, okay. And it invariably, it can be nice memories, but unfortunately the nasty ones, the brain says this is really important. So it will more likely to store it. So when something happens, like a word, a phrase, a colour, a smell, a taste, a person, will remind us if there's something there. And immediately the brain goes through this photo album at a million miles an hour.
And looks for it, doesn't it?
And finds it and goes, that. And then you get all those fight or flight responses that we get when we're triggered. And I think and that's where in extreme circumstances, you'll get the panic attacks and the nightmares, those horrible feelings. Sometimes it can be just a feeling of discomfort, like the broken bone that's knitted, but it can be in varying degrees, can't it? So I think
absolutely.
Acknowledging that and saying, okay, my photo album has just picked on that one thing. And being kind to ourselves, because we can't erase that part of the brain.
And I think as well, it's often then looking cognitively for the other truths that say, actually, so I was often called difficult and prickly by members of my family. So I held on to that and was thinking, God, everybody must hate me. What I now know is the truth is that actually those people who called me that didn't like the boundaries I was putting in. I created a huge amount of change for them, called them out. But actually my truth about the people in my network that love me and realize that I'm passionate and kind and empathetic and loyal, the two truths don't have to meet. So my brain now goes looking for, but actually all these people do love you. There are certain people, that don't, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly that. And I totally agree with you. Yeah. Not everybody's going to love us, and we can't love everybody, and we're not going to be
Absolutely.
perfect. And I think that's we have. And I think one of the biggest things that I notice with anybody who has especially been through that childhood abuse is their boundaries are all over the place. And so
Yeah.
either they're too trusting,
Yeah.
or they can't trust enough. um, they don't know what's right and what's wrong, so they
Yeah.
can look for love in the wrong kind of ways, like sexual gratification. They think sex is love, so someone pays
Yeah.
attention to them.
Yeah. Or domestic abuse and
Domestic abuse, exactly.
yeah.
And they don't know that they just don't have those healthy boundaries. And
Yeah. Absolutely.
they would hate authority. And there are figures that say, is it something like 80% of women who are in prison have been abused as child?
Yeah, huge, and
Huge
an
number.
awful lot of people will end up in an abusive relationship or
Yeah,
with mental health and drug issues. I think the incidences are something like 4 out of 5. It's
yeah,
huge. It is really huge, and of course that effect of abuse can have some spiraling consequences throughout your life, and that's kind of where I sort of see my job with my clients. I'm not a magician. I believe that we all have deeply within us, you know, the ability to heal ourselves, whether we use crystals or, you know, some talking therapy, or, you know, we're able to do it more or less ourselves. That it comes from, like you say, we have to relearn how to put in a boundary. If you've never had a boundary, it's like learning to drive a car. And quite often I see my clients will swing on a pendulum. They'll go from having no boundary to becoming really boundaried and cutting everybody out, to kind of eventually swinging back down to the middle where they're happy. There's not such a pushback. And I think, you know, it's that massively learning experience about where do I feel comfortable within that.
yeah, exactly. And I just, yeah, it's just boundaries that they just, as you say, they don't have them. And that's, and how would they? Because that person in
Absolutely.
authority
Yeah.
had actually broken their boundaries. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's really, so how would they know? You know,
Yeah, I always
it's
warn my clients that we don't, if you've never put in a boundary and you start to put in boundaries with people that you know, whether that's friends, children, husbands, partners, work, there is always a pushback. You know, that there is always a reciprocation on the other end of being called difficult or prickly, or being called arsey, or whatever it is. The pushback will always come because people see us as one thing, and when we start to step out and go, oh, actually no, the butterfly's starting to fly, and actually the butterfly says, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not answering work emails at 10 o'clock at night, or I'm not putting up with your nonsense anymore. Pack your bags. There is always a pushback with that. I think it's just being aware that you know, that there is going to be that. And obviously for somebody in a domestic abuse relationship, when we start to put in boundaries and start to challenge, that can sometimes put us in much more danger. So there's lots of work to be done there around safety, and, you know, making sure that, you know, that you are safe.
yes, yeah, yeah, definitely. And one of the other things that comes to my mind, and I'm going to ask how often you may experience this one, is that child feels the guilt and shame because part of them enjoyed it or got some pleasure in some way.
Yeah, I think that's really common. And I remember going to, I allowed myself 8 weeks of formal therapy, which is nuts really for what I'd been through. But I had 6 kids to raise, and I was working self-employed, and I didn't have time particularly for the conventional therapy and falling apart as I saw it back then. And I remember saying to my therapist, but you know, as a child, I know I experienced sexual gratification from it because it happened. And her saying to me, but our bodies are just inbuilt for pleasure. You can't help that. It's not about your guilt or your shame. You didn't ask for that. You didn't lead anybody on. It's just something that happened. And I remember feeling just, I'm not broken.
Yeah.
And I think the
Yeah.
more we can talk about stuff like that, that again, we open doors to say to other people that you are not broken, you're not dirty, you're not shameful. Your body just behaved as an adult as it should have been doing. You know, our lady parts, our vaginas and stuff, are full of nerve endings that are there for a purpose. You know, to help us conceive. So it's just that's how it is. And unfortunately, you know, small children and babies, and the nerve endings are exactly the same.
Absolutely. And I don't think it stays with our vagina or our penis or whatever else. It's the body. It will react to that
Of
pleasure.
course, absolutely.
And I, you know, really make that one clear as well, because I think some people just think that their only erogenous zone is in their genitals, but it isn't. And I think that's
Absolutely.
another
Yeah.
one I really want to come on. You know, we've got erogenous zones all over our bodies.
Yeah, well, our
And
skin
just
is a
that
massive
sense of,
erogenous zone, isn't it? Hugely.
yeah, exactly. And just that
Yeah,
touch or caress. If you've
yeah,
never had that as a child, then someone gives you that, then wow, you get such a nice feeling,
yeah,
and you don't understand what's right or wrong. And there was
yeah,
another one, I know I had one client who he got, it wasn't the sexual side for him, but he got the things that his parents didn't give him. He
yeah,
got a new bike.
yeah,
He got taken out.
yeah,
You know, given the things his parents couldn't afford. And so that makes it you know, well, I've been given something, so I owe something.
yeah. And that's quite often how people will groom children, you know, with a reward system. You know, not every child is threatened and, you know, told that I'm going to kill you. You know, more often than not, it's a kind of, like you say, a reward system. And so the child feels duty bound to then carry on because they've been paid for something in effect. Therefore, they must carry it on, and so that whole cycle continues.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's another important one I wanted to pull out, and I'm appreciate you adding to that as well. Thank you, Danny. And I think the other one is protecting. You know,
Yeah,
I'm scared. I don't want to rock the boat because
yeah,
it's my uncle. What will my parents think? Or it's a friend of theirs, or something like
yeah.
that. And I think, how can I tell my mom that her brother has assaulted me?
Yeah, and I think for lots of people that is a huge challenge. I think as people go through their own healing, and I know I thought this, that I would tell people, and that our relationships would be better. And in fact, it actually fractured a lot of relationships because people were forced to confront their own truth about, it was actually my father that abused me. So three of my siblings I don't speak to because their truth about my dad is very different to mine, and never the twain shall meet. And so whilst I believed in my naivety that it might not bring us closer together, that sounds wrong, but that it would kind of cement a relationship, when they didn't then go, actually, I understand, or I see where you're coming from. That's really challenging. And I having worked with other survivors, I know that can be really common. Relationships that were fairly secure on the outside fragment completely because people's experiences are just different.
Yes.
That you can have a member of a family who singles out just one child but doesn't abuse everybody else. So great Uncle Fred, who has been the life and soul of the party for years, that person then stands to isolate themselves from a whole genre of people, and they either stand there and speak their truth or deny it, which is quite often what some people do. They then pull back and say, actually, I didn't make it up, but perhaps I remembered it wrong, because it's easier than losing the people that are dear to you. Or you stand strong and say, actually, not necessarily even standing strong, you make a choice and just say, actually, I can't, that's my choice and I respect yours.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's another very valid point, and I've experienced that with clients as well.
Yeah,
And it really does. It pulls families completely apart.
yeah,
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? And I'm thinking about another client who owned up to her parents that she was being abused by an uncle.
yeah.
But so her parents accepted that, but they didn't cut ties with the uncle. Instead, every time the uncle came to the house, she was sent away to go and
Oh,
spend time
bless
with a
her.
neighbor. So,
Yeah,
you know, there's an acknowledgement on one side, and yet actually, I don't believe you. I don't believe you, and you're going to have to go away. Right, now I've lost your image, Danny. Right. And so, I mean, I think, as you were just saying, that that is something that we need to get out there and let people know about.
Absolutely.
And the different feelings that they get, because there's so much attached to it, isn't there, that they have all those different feelings or experiences, and I think it's distressing. It's distressing because they think they're the only one.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more we talk, the more we speak out. For me, it's about speaking out sometimes just to ourselves. That when we look in the mirror and say, "This happened to me. This is my truth," we start to free ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you write a book or you stand on your soapbox or you do. I do work with the police to raise the profile of domestic abuse and sexual violence. So I speak out actively, and I'm happy to wear a t-shirt, but that's not for everybody. Sometimes it is just about us confronting our truth and holding our hands up to ourselves and saying, I own that. And in that in itself can be so empowering to somebody. They might not want to go down the route of telling other people or confronting family members, and that's not for everybody, and that's okay.
Oh, I think that's a really important point as well. I totally agree with you, because I think confronting anybody or even talking about it it's a step too far for some people. And
Absolutely.
I think, you know, it's doing what feels right for each person.
Yeah. When I wrote my book, I was inundated with emails from other survivors, and one lady was in her 80s who'd read my book, and she said to me, "I've never told a soul, and I'm telling you." And what she put was that I can't tell you what reading your book meant, because she's of the generation as well where you didn't talk about domestic abuse or certainly sexual violence. That was put to bed. You know, she was a dirty girl and that was it. And she just said how freeing and empowering it was to be able to write down to somebody else that didn't know her, "This happened to me." And I know now, you know, when her time comes, that will have kind of sort of worked through her whole psyche to be able to acknowledge it to just one person. So there's huge power in us even just telling somebody.
Yes, and I think one point I'd also like to raise as well is the fact that sometimes people can have that trauma that they've been through, the traumatic events that they've been through, will manifest themselves in their body physically.
Yes.
Fibromyalgia is a
underactive
classic.
thyroid.
Thyroid disorder. I mean, and even other kind of illnesses can manifest themselves, and I think that is the other thing that we really, I really like people to understand that, because you know, When the Body Says No is a book by Gabor Mate. I don't know if you know.
I've not heard of that. No, thank you.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and talks about trauma and so on. But he said, you know, there's this connection, we can't disconnect it. So sometimes you can have, you know, people who've got all kinds of issues that have cropped up as a result of holding that trauma inside them. So I think that release sometimes of being able, even if it is just to say it in your head, this is what happened and it wasn't my fault, can often help with that healing of the body, physically and emotionally.
Yeah, massively. And I for one have got an underactive thyroid, and I think for years, when you look at where the thyroid gland's situated, you know, right down the bottom of your throat, that for me was about not speaking up. And I'm on medication for it, but it has resolved itself a lot better. I don't get anywhere near the symptoms I did, and I've also got fibro. But again, the more healing I do, the further I get down my journey, the more in control of the fibro I am. So I believe that there is we have to deal with stuff in our own time, and we have to shake it through. And if that wave of anger or wave of frustration comes, we deal with it, because otherwise it puts us in a cage which makes us in a really unhealthy place and pays havoc on our bodies.
Wow, I think there's so much more we could talk about.
Absolutely.
I think there is. It's such a deep subject, and yet raising awareness is so important for us to have that relationship with ourselves, and a healthy relationship with ourselves and with others. And I think that is really important. Danny, how do people get in touch with you? I will put all the details in the show notes, but what is an easy way of people to get in touch with you?
I think just looking me up on my website, which is danielledowney.co.uk. So that's Danielle with one N. And there's an email box on there. So if somebody wants to reach out and chat, somebody wants to sort of, to sort of find out about what I do, sometimes just to say, I now know I'm not alone. There's another person in the world who's walked in my shoes. I'd be really welcome to hear from anybody, via my website.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. What is one thing that people can take away with themselves, for themselves today? I think that's one thing that
I would say that our past doesn't have to be who we are, but we can accept that it's how we are sometimes. And I think that sometimes is so important that we add that caveat in, because it doesn't have to be who we are, how we are all the time. It can be a pendulum that, sometimes it affects us in different ways on different days for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I would agree. Our past does not define us, and that is so important. Thank you so much for our conversation today. It has been, we've touched on something really difficult, but I think it's so important that we talk about it.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.